Dream broke, but it's clear now. No handouts, had to get down. Now what they fear now. No money millionaire, we here now. Got scars, but I wear that crown. Turn pain to a real account. No money, no excuses, no limits.
Most people think retirement planning is this giant, intimidating maze. My guest today has spent more than 3 decades cutting through that noise and turning complex financial truths into something you can actually understand. He's a CFP, an AIF, and the author of Poponomics, where he uses music and movies and pop culture to teach real-world financial lessons. Today, we're breaking down how to retire smarter, how to stop guessing, and how to sift from saving mode to actually enjoying your life when the time comes. This is the No Money Millionaire Podcast. I'm Dave Webb, your No Money Millionaire. Let's get into it. So, Jesse, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited about our conversation.
Excellent, thank you. So before we dive in and I get started, why don't you give the audience your quick background? Tell them who you are in your own words.
Yeah. So as you and I were discussing before we started recording today, I kind of grew up in a very lower middle income family. My dad was a Navy trained electrician, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom who had a teaching degree, but as the oldest child, she didn't go back to teaching until I was around 12 years old. So I didn't grow up with money, right? We didn't have much in the way of means. My parents never talked about money, taught any financial literacy or lessons about that. But it was always as a result of that, anytime I needed or wanted to buy something or wanted something, of my own, it was go rake leaves, go mow lawns, go shovel snow, go and figure it out. So you had to learn about money on your own, and it kind of piqued an interest in me. As somebody who grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? I was a junior, senior in high school at the height of Family Ties and Alex P. Keaton, right, from Michael J. Fox. And that kind of resonated with me, and I always wanted to get involved and learn more about banking, investment, finance, investing, and so forth. And it was just one of those things that just always clicked with me. And unfortunately for me, I scored high enough on my ACT scores in high school that my high school guidance counselor suggested that I go in my math and science scores, that they suggested I go into engineering, which I did for a year and hated it, and then went back into finance and so forth. So worked my way through college, loading and unloading trunks, working as a bank teller. And then when I was finishing college at the University of Akron, I realized that my branch manager at the Huntington Bank that I worked at had been there for 32 years and was making $42,000 a year. And I was like, I'll never be able to provide for a family doing this. So I answered an ad for John Hancock in 1987 was trying to start a financial planning division. They called it their Real Life, Real Answers Financial Planning Division. They hired a certified financial planner to run it. But the old line insurance agent who was interviewing me, I was 22 years old, right? He looks at me and he goes, so tell me why you'd like to have a career selling life insurance. And I looked at him and I said, well, I actually have no intention of having a career selling life insurance. And he's like, why are you here? And I said to him, I said, well, I thought that if I could make a living out of helping people solve their financial issues, that it would be rewarding to my clients and to me. And for some reason, they hired me. Like, I still can't figure out, based on that answer, why they did. And after about 2 years, I moved to an independent financial planning group. And then in 1997, I had the opportunity to become a partner in a group that was forming. My two partners at the time were 48 and 44. I was 31. I was the kid in the group back at the time. And we had that partnership for about 20 years until my oldest partner was retiring. And about 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago now, I started a firm called Impel Wealth Management. And, I have 2 other certified financial planners and about 5 other team members, support staff, and we oversee about $360 million of investment assets for about 140 client families today.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So let's start with Poponomics. When people hear that a financial advisor is using pop culture to teach money, it is not the norm. It's not what you're used to hearing. So, but it works obviously. So why? What? Explain that to us.
So when I was in my previous partnership with the two other partners and several other financial advisors in the firm, we used to take, starting in like 2010, we used to take turns writing blog posts to our clients. It's early days of doing it. So we'd write one a week. So every month I'd write one or two. And every once in a while I'd throw in a pop culture reference. Something sounded funny in my head, or I related something to a Beatles song or a Monty Python something or other, and I'd get some comments here or there. When I started my own firm in 2017, I was responsible for writing all of it. So now it was me every week writing stuff. And then when COVID hit in 2020 and you couldn't be face to face with people, in order to make sure we were communicating with clients regularly, I kind of doubled down on that and started writing 2 blog posts a week. Well, in late March of 2020, I don't know if you remember this, but the government passed the CARES Act with all the stimulus and so forth, the PPP loans and the enhanced unemployment benefits and stimulus checks and all that. At the same time, the Federal Reserve Bank cut interest rates to 0 and flooded the banking system with money and so forth. And Steve Mnuchin, who was the Treasury Secretary, and Jay Powell, the Federal Reserve Bank Chairman, did a joint press conference where they said, this is an unconventional recession and it's going to take unconventional financial weapons to fight it. And the first thing that popped into my head was the scene from Animal House where Otter and the frat guys are like, now we could fight them with conventional weapons, but that could take years and cost millions of lives. And I don't know what made me do it, but I wrote a blog post comparing the actions of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury to the frat guys from Animal House. And I got more my wife said, this is crazy, don't do this, right? And I got more good feedback on that on that blog post than I'd ever gotten before. People thought it was funny. They remembered it. I got all kinds of comments. And about a few months later, there was a report that came out that showed that at the end of 2019, the U.S. economy was about $21.7 trillion of GDP. By June 30th of 2020, after 6 months, after COVID shutdowns for 4 months and so forth, the U.S. economy had shrunk from 21.7 to $19.5 trillion. And I was sitting there thinking about it. I was going, it's like the COVID shutdowns dug a $2.2 trillion hole in the U.S. economy. And the first thing that popped into my head was the episode of Friends where Joey and Monica and Chandler go to the beach and Joey digs this big hole and then the waves rush in and fill it. And so I wrote a blog post. I don't know if you remember this, but all the Friends episodes are called The One Where, right? And I wrote a blog post called The One where Joey and the economy dug a hole. And I said, just like the waves rushed in and filled Joey's hole,
right, the
Federal Reserve Bank and the federal government rushed in and filled a $2.2 trillion economic hole with $6 trillion of stimulus. There might be some unintended consequences when you stuff $6 million of money in a $2 trillion hole. What might happen? And people loved it. And so from that point forward, after those 2 blog posts, I'm like, okay, if I can find a connection point, and it's not that the lessons come from the movies or the music or whatever, but what happens is people remember the lessons because they equate it to the music or the movies or whatever we're talking about.
Sure, definitely. So I think that's the problem with finance. People feel judged, talked down to, or overwhelmed. You strip that out, and then you turn it into a conversation that people already understand.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting, right? Like a lot of people say, I'm too late. I should have done this 20 years ago, whatever. I start the book with I don't know, like I've got a copy of the book here. I don't know whether it'll show up with the light and so forth, but Poponomics, and it's all the movies and music, and it's you see the puzzle pieces on the front of it. Well, the book's written as the 12 chapters are the 12 pieces of your unique puzzle that you need to put together to create your unique financial goals, retirement plan, and so forth. And I start by asking, there's two things that I think you got to do. Like I start asking people, like, remember back when you were a kid, or when you had kids, doing puzzles with them? I said, what's the first thing you had to do to do a puzzle? And people usually start by saying, well, you got to turn all the pieces over so you can see the pictures, or you got to find the edge pieces, or you got to find the four corner pieces. And I said, no, the first thing you have to do is look at the box, right? You got to know what the picture is that you're solving for. You got to know what it is you're trying to put together. So helping people have a vision for their own unique future is part of it. But then the second thing I think is interesting, and this is the first chapter of the book talks about where are you today, right? Like I always say, if you were flying across country, right, and you had to make a connecting flight in Denver, Chicago, or Dallas, or Atlanta, whatever, you get off your plane, you're walking down the concourse, what's the first thing you do? You look for the concourse map, and once you find the concourse map, you look for the thing that says you are here. Because if I have to get to B27, I have to know where I am to know how to get to B27. And I think what happened with a lot of people in the post-COVID years is they lost track of where they were. They didn't know anymore. And so first of all, we have to take an inventory of where people are, kind of define the picture on the box. That, the picture on the box is their B37 or whatever, and then help them figure out, I'm here today, and what steps can I take? What are the, it's kind of like the movie What About Bob? What are the baby steps that we got to take to start getting from point A to point B to help you, build your preferred future?
Sure. I read on your information that you use the line, hope is not a strategy. And, a lot of people, I think, live their entire financial life like that. Yeah. So how'd you come up with that line? What was the motivation behind that?
That's funny you asked that. That's one that happens, that people ask about a lot. And I can't even tell you where I've heard it. It's not an original line. I'd love to take credit for it, but it's hope is not a strategy. Like there's actually a Voya commercial out right now where there's two guys sitting at a table, and the one guy's talking about how his financial advisors, doing this and that for him, they're charting this path, and he asked his friend, how are you doing this? And he goes, I'm just hoping for the best, right? And it's like, hope's not a strategy. You've really got to know what those steps are, the other thing I tell people is a lot of times people feel guilt about the past. They're like, I should have done this, and if I had started 10 years ago, it's kind of like, none of that matters, right? You are where you are today. We can't change what happened in the past. All we can do is figure out where you are today and then take the steps that will be constructive to move forward, right? So I think, helping people realize that there are things they can do today that will improve their future self, and that there are concrete things that are not just hope, really is a starting point for that.
Sure. So when people think about retirement planning, it's one of those things where there's so many different ways, so much you can do. Yep. That, I think that might even, prevent somebody from actually doing something. So what's the first step that you would recommend for someone in their 40s, 50s, or 60s who feels behind to start doing today?
Yeah, I think the have you ever heard of a book called The Millionaire Next Door?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay. Thomas Stanley. think it was written in 97 or 98, right? And now I'm from Northeast Ohio. I know you're originally from Detroit, right? From the Midwest areas. And I think that book, The Millionaire Next Door, resonates with a lot of people from the Midwest because it's there's nothing magic about it, right? It's no matter what you make, you spend less than what you make, you save and invest the rest, right? You put money into your 401k at work every paycheck. You make your mortgage payment. You pay down debt. You build a disciplined diversification into your investment strategy. You don't make crazy buying decisions based on credit, right? I always tell people buying things on credit is a means, credit cards is a means to buy something you don't really need with money you don't really have, right? And then you don't make investment decisions off tips you get from an online platform, blog post, whatever, or at the golf course or barbershop or whatever. Obviously, I don't really know what goes on at a barbershop much anymore, but I just say it's the cumulative effect of days, right? It's I'm here today, and if I do these basic habits, it's almost inevitable that over time that will compound into something positive for the future. And it's funny because I have clients that will come to me. So starting in the business in 1987, literally, I was on a Zoom meeting with clients of mine that live down in Georgia now. They used to live in Northeast Ohio, retired Goodyear engineer and his wife, who've been clients of mine since 1988, right? They've been with me for 37 years now. And, you look at it and you go, the cumulative effect of that compounding over long periods of time, they got to where they are. And when they retire, it's not uncommon to have people go, man, thank you so much for everything you did for me or for us. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you, whatever. And I remind them that probably at least 2/3 of where you are today is your good habits. And if we helped you with the asset allocation and buying the right investments and tax strategies and this and that, it's going to help you enhance what you're doing. But I don't want to make us sound more important than what we are. But you look at it and you go, it's like a doctor, right? You can be the greatest doctor in the world and give people the best advice in the world. But if they smoke 2 packs a day and drink a 6-pack at night and they eat pizza every day and they don't act, you can't out-doctor bad habits. It's no different financially.
InvestorFi, the #1 lending source for first-time and early-stage investors. Just learned how to find your first deal? Let's get it funded. InvestorFi, the only No Money Millionaire certified lender. Find us at InvestorFi Lending or visit our website at investorfilending.com. InvestorFi, turning new investors into trained professionals. What are you waiting for? Schedule your free review today.
I started being serious about real estate because I didn't have anything to look forward to for retirement. I didn't work anywhere that I had a pension. I didn't work anywhere that there was a 401k. And I really didn't do well with the whole saving aspect. And so I knew people who were in retirement and they were on Social Security and on a fixed income and how they were having to budget and live. And I started thinking seriously. And when I turned 50, I started thinking seriously, what's up ahead for me? And that was the big push for me to get into real estate and start developing apartments or rental income, passive income. And so, I talk to a lot of people like that in my podcast, in my videos and stuff that I make, that I know people that were in the similar situation as me, and they're coming to retirement. And, and maybe haven't planned for it as well as they should have. And so, how do you get people, when they're thinking about retirement, how do you get people to stop being and reacting so emotionally when everything you get today and television and the news is, the world is ending and, the sky is falling. So
Yeah.
how do you talk to people like that?
So that's one of my soapbox issues, right? There's actually, I was just glancing because I wanted to make sure I had the right one, but it's the puzzle piece 5 of the book. Chapter 5 of the book is actually titled "Navigating the Negative 24-Hour News and Social Media Spin Cycle," right? Because they've got 24 hours a day of CNBC they got to fill every day. And, you think about how many of the segments are almost like the old point counterpoint things where they've got somebody who comes on and says, well, here's my opinion. And somebody else goes, well, I would do this instead. Right. And it's like, how do you walk away from that with advice that you can apply to your life? And, I remind people regularly that if Money Magazine or Forbes Magazine or CNBC told you every issue or every day that the way to wealth and building wealth and being financially successful is to spend less than what you make, save and invest regularly, put money in your 401k, pay down debt, don't make crazy buying decisions on credit and so forth, stay disciplined with your asset allocation and diversification. If they told you that every month, you'd have to buy that exactly once. Right? But they don't do that, right? They tell you, here's the 6 funds you have to buy right now, or 8 funds or 8 stocks that you must own to profit today. But, if you look back, it was literally in the summer before Sam Bankman-Fried went bankrupt that he was anointed as the next coming of Warren Buffett on the cover of one of the financial journals, right? And you sit there and you go, 4 months later, the guy's net worth had gone from $100 billion to less than $100,000, and he's in jail, right? Yeah. So, I also remind people that if the media and the masses were right, the media and the masses would be wealthy, and by and large, they're not. So I probably don't want to follow that advice.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And
yeah, well,
I'm just going to say, just real quick, right? I was out in Sedona, Arizona in April of this year. And I don't know if you remember, it was April 2nd that President Trump, the market was already down 10, 12% from fears about what was going to go on with trade tariff stuff and so forth. Yeah, and it was April 2nd that President Trump went out in the Rose Garden at 4 p.m. and did the Liberation Day announcements, which I don't want to get overtly political here because I generally agree with a fair amount of policy side of what goes on within the administration. But I will tell you that I think the trade tariff numbers were not greatly conceived or communicated, and it caused the market to drop horribly, right? So by April 8th of this year, the market's down from February 19th to April 8th, the market's down 20%. Every headline is negative, and everybody's panicking, right? And so I actually had a reporter from the Akron Beacon Journal reach out to me in Arizona and asked me if I could answer these 12 questions for an article they were trying to put together the next day because they were getting inundated with things. Well, you sit here and 7 months later, and you sit there and you go, if you had panicked and done the wrong thing at the wrong time, over the last 7 months, we've continued to have trade tariff uncertainty. We've continued to have uncertainty about the path of inflation and what the Federal Reserve Bank is going to do, or even the independence of the Fed and whether Jay Powell will have a job. We've continued to have uncertainty around what trade tariff stuff will do to the economy or corporate profits. And I know this is only 6 months ago now, but in the midst of that time period, we decided to drop a few nuclear bombs on Iran's, a few bombs on Iran's nuclear facilities, right? And if somebody had told you on April 8th, when the headlines were negative and the market was down 20%, that over the next 6 months, all of those things were going to happen. But don't worry, the market will be up 20, 25%. You'll be fine. Nobody would have believed them at that time. And so, you've got to have, this is where I always say, like your financial plan and your discipline, diversification, allocation is your North Star, right? If you have that, that's what should guide you, not what story breaks on the news midday or what happens with this government official or that government official or what some corporate executive says about earnings. It shouldn't drive your day-to-day activities. Your day-to-day activities should be driven by your financial plan and your age and risk appropriate asset allocation strategy.
Sure. But everybody is, they're obsessed with looking rich instead of actually being rich. And so you have mentioned earlier about the Millionaire Next Door.
Yep.
And so he talks about a mindset in that book. You want to break that down for the listeners?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I've seen it, right? You sit there and you go, there is a big difference between people who have habits and develop wealth versus people who live affluently, right? Like I know people who dual income families making $200,000-$400,000 a year, and they've got the crazy expensive house, and they've got a BMW and a Lexus, and they've got their kids in private school, and they've got a second mortgage on the house, and they take these crazy extravagant vacations, and they live like these rock star lifestyles, and they look very affluent, but they have no wealth because they're spending it and consuming it all. And the weird thing about it is, I did, as the Financial Planning Association here in Northeast Ohio did in conjunction with the Cleveland and Akron newspapers and a couple of radio stations, like a call-in show. This is maybe 15 years ago, where people could call in and ask a certified financial planner a question, right? And you had people calling in, and I remember I talked with a guy who was a Goodyear executive who was making like $180,000 a year, and he had a mortgage, he had a second mortgage, home equity line of credit. He had 4 credit cards with about $80,000 of debt. He had 2 car loans. He had all kinds of student loan debt for his kids. And he was firmly convinced that if Goodyear paid him $210,000 instead of $180,000 a year, his problems would be solved. He thought it was an income issue, right? And from running a business, right? You got a P&L, and you've got the income side and the expense side. This guy didn't have an income problem. He had an expense problem, and he couldn't control his spending, right? That is so different than the people who have habits that build wealth, right? The people who have habits that build wealth go back to those same things we've talked about a couple of times already. They spend less than what they make. They save and invest the rest. They pay down debt and all that stuff. And I have clients that never made 6 figures in any year who have $2 million of net worth because they had the right habits, right? And they did the right things over long periods of time. And they were willing to defer some current lifestyle in exchange for future, future wealth and future security. I saw a great quote, and I don't know whether you want to go down this path or not, but I saw a great quote. This is probably 25 years ago, and it's always resonated with me. And it's like this with investing, right? They say, the quote was along the lines of, on which end of your investing lifespan do you want to take risk so that you don't have risk on the other side? And the idea is, right, I can put all my money in CDs and guaranteed treasury bills and stuff today that takes no risk, and I'm going to earn 3-4% on it, and I'm never going to accumulate enough to have a low risk retirement. Or I can put money into my 401k and use, S&P 500 index funds or target date funds or whatever that have more risk today, more volatility today, but there's a high probability that I'll compound and accumulate enough to not have risk on the other side. It's kind of the same with spending versus saving from that millionaire next door. It's like you can have the affluent lifestyle today, you'll never accumulate the money you need to be wealthy tomorrow.
Sure. Now, on the other extreme, now those people who are good at saving and they save all their lives and they've made it and they're in retirement, but then they still have that scarcity mindset. They're still saving and not spending. Do you see that as well?
Oh, I see it all the time, right? I have this conversation with clients. I just had it with my clients that I was just on with. Like I said, they've been clients of mine since 1987. Now they're only in their early 70s. They're 74 and 73. I mean, like when they became clients of mine, I was 22 or 23 and they were 33 or 34 years old. Like we all kind of grown up together. But, I've got clients, I'll go two different ways with this. You've got clients who, if you break down your financial life in like two broad brushstrokes, right? You have what I always call the accumulation phase of life, which is from the day you start working until the day you retire. You do all of those habits to accumulate wealth, and then you cross that threshold from that transition from work life to retirement life, and you go from the accumulation phase to the distribution phase of life. And there are people that just can't flip the switch, right? They kind of go, I have built all of this over the last 30, 35, 40 years because I did these habits. And if I change these habits, I might not have that anymore, right? And part of what we try to do is within the framework of their retirement plan is to say, hey, long-term studies show, and there was a seminal study done on this in the early 90s, and it's been reconfirmed dozens and dozens of times. You've probably heard the 4% rule for withdrawals from your investments, right? So this couple that I was just with, right, they've got $3.5 million of net worth. They're debt-free. They basically have an $800,000 house and $2.8 million of investments, right? Cash and investments. Well, their pensions and Social Security give them about $7,000 a month. So that's $84,000 a year. You take 4% even on just $2.5 million, it's another $100,000 a year. They could spend $180,000, $190,000, $200,000 a year and never even worry about it, right? I can't get them to spend $110,000 a year, right? I say this to people all the time. Right, and there's a quote in the beginning of the second chapter of the book that I attribute to a very good friend of mine who I lost during COVID. He's an estate planning attorney that I worked very closely with for 30 years, and he always used to say to our clients, like, in the whole history of mankind, we've only ever determined 3 things that you can do with money. Right, you can save it, you can spend it, or you can give it away. And if you don't give it away when you're living, you'll give it away when you die because you can't take it with you. Right. Right. Well, if you get to retirement and you've got those kind of resources, right? Pension, we always talk about what are the income resources that you'll get from pension and Social Security. And there are still a few people, mostly government employees, teachers, state workers and stuff that do get pensions. But your Social Security and your pension, and then what are the asset resources that you have that you can draw 4% a year from? And you sit there and you go, if you've accumulated way more than you need to live the lifestyle you want to have in retirement, then you don't need to save anymore. That only leaves spend it or give it away, right? So what are you going to do with it, right? It's you have some really interesting conversations with clients. The clients that I was just with, right? I said, look, they've got about $2.5 million of investments with me, and then they've got some cash and some gold and silver coins and some other stuff. It totals 2.8 million. But I said, look, if we've got $2.5 million of cash in investments in 2025, I said, if 10 years down the road, we have $3.7 million because of growth and compounding, and you guys haven't done everything you wanted to do in life, we failed, right? I'd much rather see your 2.5 million grow to 3.2 million and have you guys say, we did everything we wanted. We traveled where we wanted to go. We did what we wanted to do. We created great shared experiences and memories with our grandkids. It is a constant coaching lesson with those clients to give them the freedom to be willing and have the comfort level to spend. And I'll end this part with this, because this is like a great story. I had a client say to me the other day, they were like, hey, you know how you keep telling us to spend our money? They're taking a trip next year to Australia, New Zealand. They're going to be gone for 2.5, 3 weeks, and they're going to fly first class, and they've never flown first class in their life. And they said, we keep hearing you tell us we should spend more money, and it finally hit us that if we don't use our money to fly first class, eventually somebody else is going to.
Yeah.
And I thought
definitely.
That was one of the best comments I've gotten from a client in a long time.
Yeah. Well, I read, and it may be in The Millionaire Next Door, I read a lot of those books around that time that came out. But, they were profiling millionaires, and they looked, and they was it because they were doctors and they had this much salary? Well, not all doctors, were financially wealthy.
Oh, sure.
Was it lawyers? Was it, engineers? What was it, a particular field or income level? And it wasn't. It came down with how much they saved. It wasn't how much you made. It was how much you saved. Yep. And I just recently read where, you're supposed to save and then spend what you have after you save, instead of spend and save what you have left after spending.
No question. No.
So, it's the discipline. And then most of your wealthiest people, they don't look wealthy.
Oh, yeah. I tell people that all the time, right? Like, so one of my textbook examples of this, and I actually use I all the names have been changed to protect the innocent in the book, and I like most of the characters in the book are kind of an amalgamation of different clients. But I have a client that he was president of the New York, Pennsylvania region of a phone company back in the day, and so he had been an Air Force fighter pilot for 20 years, retired from the military, went to work for Alltel Phone Company, which doesn't exist in that same way anymore, but it's been bought out and so forth. Became president of the company. So when he retired, he had his military pension, his Alltel pension, his Social Security, his wife's Social Security, his wife's library pension, right? So between them, they were bringing in $8,000 a month. They had almost 2.5 million. Now this is 25 years ago. They had more than $2 million of investment assets with me, and they literally lived in a $220,000 house in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. He was driving an 8-year-old Ford Ranger pickup truck, and Mike eventually passed from Parkinson's in 2015. One of the greatest guys you'd ever want to meet. But you would not have clue one that this guy had those kind of resources, income or asset resources. And this is where it got funny, because they only had one son who was divorced and one granddaughter. And so it was hard for them to even gift back in the day, because back in those days, the gift tax limit was $10,000, $12,000 a year.
Right.
So they could only gift $10,000, $12,000 to each of them, to each of the son and granddaughter. Well, you start taking $2.5 million, earning 5, 6, 7% a year, even really conservative numbers, right? You're generating $250,000, $300,000 a year of growth. I can't get them to spend $20,000, $30,000. They make gifts, and they still have $150,000 or $200,000 of growth over and above that. So I finally said to him, what are you going to do with the money? And they said, they'd never given more than $4,000 or $5,000 a year to charity in their life, right? And they said, we'd like to start using our money to help others. What do you think? And I'm like, great. I'm like, where do you want to start? And they're like, how much can we give? I'm like, we give $60, $80, $100,000 a year away if you want to. And they said, let's start with a goal of 30, right? And I'll never forget this. Mike calls me up and he goes, hey, the local volunteer fire department's trying to raise money to buy a new fire truck. Would it be okay if I gave them $2,000? And I said, Mike, if it's less than $20,000, don't ever call me again. Write the check, right? But they'd never done it before. And I tell the story in the book because if you look at the surviving spouse today, they've given away more than $1 million to charity. They have more than $3 million today of invest. They have more than they started with and have given away more than $1 million, helped all kinds of people. And you'd never have clue one they have any of that money.
Sure. No, that's how it is, So you've mentioned your book, throughout today's show. Why don't you tell anybody who's listening, why don't you tell them, where they can find it, where they can find you, please.
Yeah. Thank you. So my firm's name, it's actually, I'm wearing because I'm in Northeast Ohio and it snowed 4 inches overnight, I'm wearing a sweater today that actually has Impel Wealth Management, which is the name of my firm. Impel, when we chose the name for the firm, right? Impel means to impart motion towards a future goal or future destination, or to give somebody the confidence to move forward. And that's our tagline, moving life forward, right? Helping people use money as a means, not an end, to accomplish what's important in life. So impelwealth.com, there's all kinds of information about the book on there. There's actually a separate tab. Or you can go to Poponomics, P-O-P-enomics, Poponomics.com. It'll take you to a direct web page there. You can find it on Amazon. A lot of people find us through our blog posts. I write generally 2 blog posts a week, right? Which is why I ended up writing a book, because, I started out with, since 2020, I've probably written 700-800 blog posts. And people are like, when are you going to write a book? And the more I thought about it, right, and I'll finish with this analogy, right? It kind of hit me the other day. A blog post is like a 45 single, right? It's a single story, right? The book's like the album, right? It's Dark Side of the Moon from start to finish, or whatever, and it gives you the chance to tell the whole story, which is why I finally decided to go from just doing the blog post to writing the book.
Excellent. And everybody listening, all of that will be down in the description as well. So, Jesse, I really appreciate your time, all your valuable information. Thank you for coming and sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It went fast. So,
yeah, it does. It flies when you're having fun. So for everyone listening, stop guessing and stop stressing and start planning like your future actually matters. This is the No Money Millionaire Podcast. I'll see you at the next episode. Thank you.
No money millionaire, we here now. Used to dream broke, but it's clear now. No